I am going to tell you about a family, not my family. I want to be clear about that before we go anywhere. I have my own family and my own stories, and neither of them are your business. What I am about to tell you belongs to the Okafors of Houston, Texas, and I am telling it because I was there for most of it and because some stories, if nobody tells them, just sit in a room getting heavier until the room collapses. My name is Comfort Ease. I am 61 years old. I taught secondary school in Lagos for 11 years and in London for 9 before my husband's work brought us to Houston in 2011. I know the Okafor family from our church, Redemption House Fellowship on Westheimer, 11 o'clock service, third pew from the left on the right side. If you are facing the altar, and from the Nigerian Women's Professional Circle, where I have sat across from Mama Okafor at exactly 47 monthly meetings over 14 years. I counted. Old habit. If you're interested in this gist, hit the like button, subscribe, and type interested in the comments, and I will give you a heart. I am a woman who notices things. I was a headmistress for 6 of my teaching years, and a headmistress notices things the way other people breathe. Not because she decides to, because she cannot stop. She walks into a room, and before she has removed her coat, she knows which student has not done the reading, which teacher is carrying something personal, and exactly where the problem is going to come from before it comes. It is not a gift. It is a condition. My husband has been living with it for 31 years, and he will tell you himself, it is a condition. I walked into the Okafor family story the same way I walked into every room. I noticed things. I am going to tell you what I noticed. Where are you watching this from? What time is it there? Tell me in the comments. I want to know who is in the room when I tell this. Some stories need witnesses. Chief Emeka Okafor built Okafor Logistics over 30 years. Freight, supply chain, West African trade routes out of Houston. Not glamorous work. Not the kind of thing you explain at a dinner party in 2 sentences, but the kind of work that done correctly for 3 decades produces something real. Contracts, relationships, a name that means something in a specific room with specific people. That is harder to build than most things, and he had built it. He was a compact man, precise, well-dressed in the specific way of men who came up with nothing and decided that appearance was a language worth learning early. He wore a watch that told the correct time and replaced it the moment it didn't. I know this because he told me once at a fellowship dinner that he had gone through 4 watches in 30 years, and each one was replaced on the day it lost 30 seconds. Not when it stopped, when it lost 30 seconds. I thought about that for a week. He had 2 children, a son, Chidi, 38 years old at the time of the events I am describing, a daughter, Adana, 35. Between those 2 facts, the son and the daughter, the 38 and the 35, sits everything I am about to tell you. Chidi was the one Chief Okafor talked about. I will say that plainly because it is simply true, and plain is the only way truth should be delivered. At church dinners when fathers compared children, Chief Okafor talked about Chidi. At women's circle meetings when Mama Okafor updated us on the family, she talked about Chidi. At the annual Nigerian Professional Association Gala, where families took photographs and the photographs went into the community newsletter, Chidi was in the photographs, standing beside his father, both of them in Igbada, both of them with the expression of men who expected to be photographed. He was a pleasant man, Chidi. Good handshake. Remembered your name from the last time he met you, and used it when he greeted you the next time, which is a skill more people should practice and fewer people do. The kind of person designed by God and circumstance to stand comfortably in a room that was prepared for him before he arrived. Adana was not in the photographs, not because she was excluded, because she was not there. She had left Houston at 22 for London with a business degree, a single carry-on bag, and a plan nobody in the family knew about because nobody in the family had thought to ask. That was 13 years before the meeting. Not much. That is the honest answer, and I think it is the most important one. Because when a child leaves and the family does not talk about it, it is never because there is nothing to say. It is because what there is to say is too expensive, too load-bearing. You pull that one thread and you have to look at the whole garment, and sometimes people would rather have the garment. Mama Okafor mentioned Adana the way you mention whether in a city you used to live in. Briefly, accurately, without investment. She is in London. She is working. She is fine. The third one, she is fine, was the one I always listened to. Fine is the word families use when they have stopped asking the question. Not happy, not thriving, not struggling. Fine. Fine means we have reached an agreement not to know more than this, and the agreement is holding, and let us not test it. Chief Okafor mentioned her less. When he did, it was in the context of the family as a unit. My children, my family, never Adana specifically. He was not a cruel man. I want to be accurate here because accuracy matters more than drama. He was a man who had decided what his legacy looked like, had organized his attention and his resources and his affection accordingly, and had lived inside that decision for so long that he had stopped being able to see it as a decision at all. It had become simply the shape of things. That is a particular kind of damage. Not loud, not intentional, but structural. The kind that holds everything up and holds everything in place and cannot be questioned without the whole building trembling. Chitty never mentioned her in my presence. Not once in 14 years of church and community dinners and association events and fellowship hall conversations did Chitty Okafor say his sister's name in front of me. Not with warmth, not with coldness, not with anything. Just absence. The complete, unbroken absence of a name that should have been there. As if she were a room in the house that nobody used, and therefore nobody mentioned, and after enough years nobody remembered was there at all. I noticed that. The first time I noticed it, I thought nothing of it. Siblings have distance. That is normal. The second time I noted it quietly. The fifth time I filed it. By the 14th time, it was a fact I carried the way I carry all facts, without conclusion attached, waiting for the other facts that would tell me what to do with it. I want to tell you about the women's circle before we go further, because it is the room where most of what I know reached me, and you should understand the room. The Nigerian Women's Professional Circle of Houston meets on the third Saturday of every month. Lunch. Rotating host. 41 members currently. Though it has been as few as 26 and as many as 53 depending on the year and the season and the general condition of Nigerian social life in the greater Houston area. Women of a certain age, a certain background, doctors, lawyers, educators, business owners, women who married men in those categories. Sharp, opinionated, deeply invested in the appearance of harmony, and equally invested in the substance of information. I have been a member since 2012. I should tell you what a room full of Nigerian professional women of a certain generation actually sounds like when the official agenda is finished and the plates have been cleared, and someone says something that opens a door. It sounds like 41 women who have each spent 30 years being the most observant person in every room they entered, all talking at the same time, each one absolutely certain she has the piece nobody else has. Sometimes they are right. I have learned more in that room than in any classroom I ever taught in, and I taught in some excellent classrooms. Mama Okafor, Mrs. Gloria Okafor, was a core member. She had been there before me, and she had the specific standing of a woman whose husband had built something. Not celebrity. Standing. The kind that comes from longevity and consistency and the quiet authority of a person who has been in the room long enough that her absence would be noticed and her presence is simply assumed. She was warm. She was generous with her time and her cooking and her attention. She had a laugh that arrived suddenly and ended cleanly, no trailing off. And it changed her face entirely when it came. I liked her. I like her still. She was also a woman who did not talk about her daughter. And I, being who I am, noticed. I found this out in pieces, over time, from sources that had no idea they were giving me a picture. Piece 1. 3 years ago. Women's Circle meeting, April. A newer member named Funk, who works in international trade financing for a bank downtown, mentioned offhand that she had recently completed due diligence work for a London consultancy called Vantage Meridian. Supply chain focused. Strong West African client base. Run by a Nigerian woman who had built it from scratch over 8 years. Funk said this the way she said most things, as evidence of her own professional reach, the name-dropping of proximity, and moved on before I could ask a follow-up question. I did not react. I filed it. Piece 2. 6 months later. Church social, October. I was standing near the refreshments table, which is, I will tell you for free, the best intelligence position at any Nigerian gathering. People who are filling their plates are briefly distracted and briefly honest. 2 men from the business association were discussing Okafor logistics in the low voices men use when they are not discussing a problem, but are discussing the proximity of a problem. One of them said the company had been carrying a solid anchor client for about a year now. London firm. Kept them stable while the market softened on the West African routes. Good contract to have. Chitty was lucky. The other man said yes, Chitty was lucky. Neither of them knew I was within hearing distance. I was selecting Chin Chin with the focused attention of a woman who has no interest in their conversation whatsoever. Filed. Piece 3. Mama Okafor. Our 43rd monthly meeting. February, the following year. I asked, as I sometimes do when I want to see what a sentence costs a person to say, what kind of work Adana was doing in London these days. Mama Okafor said, consulting. I said, what kind? She said, business. Supply chain, I think. She doesn't explain it much when we speak. I said, but you speak. She said, occasionally. Yes, there was something in the word occasionally that I noted and did not pursue. Not the time. I said, interesting work. Mama Okafor said yes, and moved the conversation elsewhere with the efficiency of a woman who has had years of practice moving conversations away from that particular direction. I let her move it. I sat with those 3 pieces for 4 months. I am a methodical woman, and methodology requires patience. I did not want to connect dots that were not connected. I did not want to build a picture from insufficient evidence. I taught children for 20 years that the worst kind of wrong answer is the confident one. But at the end of 4 months, I had a picture. How many of you have already put it together? Because I'm going to say something and I want you to sit with it before we continue. Adana Okafor left her father's house at 22. She went to the city where West African trade meets European capital. She built a supply chain consultancy specializing in West African routes. And her brother's company, her father's company, was running those same routes. Sit with that. If you have put it together already, tell me in the comments. If you are still working it out, that is fine. Stay with me. The picture gets clearer. What I need you to understand before it gets clearer is this. Some of what I am about to tell you I know for certain. Some of it I have assembled from credible sources. And some small part of it I can only speculate about because I am a witness, not a participant, and witnesses have limits. I will tell you clearly which is which. Here is what I know for certain. Adana Okafor registered Vantage Meridian as a private limited company in England and Wales in 2016 when she was 24 years old. This I confirmed through public records available to anyone who knows to look. The company's stated focus, supply chain consulting for West and Central African trade networks. Registered office, London. Director, Adana C. Okafor. I looked at that registration date for a long time. She was 24. She had been in London for 2 years. And she had a business degree and no clients and no capital base and no connections in that market. And she registered a company. I taught school for 20 years. I know the difference between a student who is figuring it out as they go and a student who arrived with a plan and is executing it. I know it from the quality of their silence. The way certain students, when you ask a question, do not raise their hand immediately, but look down at the desk for exactly 1 second before they look up. They are not thinking. They already thought. They are deciding whether to show you yet. Adana Okafor had been that student. She built the company over 8 years. I will not walk you through every year because I was not there for every year, and inventing details is not something I do. What I can tell you is the shape of what it became. 14 corporate clients by the time the events of this story occurred. Staff of 9. Annual revenue of £2.3 million sterling. Not dollars, pounds. She registered her company in 2016. She did not tell her family then or in the years that followed. Not when the first client signed, not when the fifth. Not when she moved from a desk in a shared workspace in Peckham to a proper office in Canary Wharf, which is the kind of address in London that tells a particular story about the kind of company that occupies it. Not when the revenue crossed £1 million. Not when it crossed 2. Not once. Why not? People ask me that. They say, comfort, why would a person build something like that and not tell her own parents? Why would you carry that alone for 8 years? I say, you answered your own question. She carried it because it was hers. The moment she told them, it became a subject for evaluation. And she had grown up in a house where what you were building was evaluated before it was finished. She had left that house at 22. She was not going back inside it just to hand them something else to evaluate. She was not done yet. When she was done, she would tell them. And she had a very specific idea of how the telling would go. Okafor Logistics became a Vantage Meridian vendor 18 months before the meeting. Not a client, a vendor. This distinction matters, and I will explain why it matters. A client is someone you advise. A vendor is someone you hire to do physical work. Adana did not hire her brother's company to consult for her. She hired her brother's company to move freight, to execute on the West African routes that Vantage Meridian needed covered for its own client accounts. She contracted the company her father built to perform a function inside the company she built. Think about what that means. Take a moment with it. It came through a broker, Gerald Tund, London, freight placement for mid-sized consultancies. I am told he is charming in the slightly too much way of people who have made charm their primary professional instrument. I am told he is very good at his actual job, which is matching shipping capacity to consultancy logistics needs, and that the matching he did here was technically correct. Okafor Logistics had the right routes, the right capacity, the right relationships with the right port authorities. Vantage Meridian needed exactly what Okafor Logistics offered. Gerald did not know Adana was an Okafor. She had built Vantage Meridian under that name, Vantage Meridian, not Okafor. Nothing connecting back to Houston, nothing that would flag in a standard brokerage due diligence process. If Gerald had known, he would certainly have mentioned it. He mentions everything. Chitty saw the contract cross his desk. He saw the revenue line. He saw a number that slowed the bleeding he had been quietly managing since he took over the company 3 years earlier. And he received that number with the relief of a man who had needed it and did not ask what it came with. That is not a character flaw. That is arithmetic. When you are managing a shortfall and money arrives, you process the money. You do not immediately investigate the genealogy of the money. But you also do not keep your eyes closed forever. Chitty kept his eyes closed. For 18 months, Vantage Meridian's invoices came in, were processed, and were credited to the company's revenue. For 18 months, Adana Okafor's company was the single largest revenue contributor to Okafor Logistics. For 18 months she was, without her father's knowledge or her mother's knowledge or any official acknowledgement of any kind, the reason her father's life's work was still standing, the reason the watch was still running. I need to slow down here and be fair to Chitty, because fairness is not optional. When Chief Okafor's health declined 3 years ago, kidney trouble, managed but serious, the kind that changes what a man can carry, he handed the company to Chitty. Not as a decision made from a long discussion about readiness, as the natural execution of an assumption that had been running in the family for 20 years. Chitty is here. Chitty knows the business. Chitty is the son. That is a particular kind of inheritance. Not just assets and contracts and staff and a name on the building. Also the gap between what the company was under the man who built it and what it would be under the man who received it. Chief Okafor had 30 years of personal relationships with freight agents, port authorities, government contacts across West Africa. Those relationships were his. They answered his phone calls. They extended him credit. They gave him information that they would not give a company. They gave it to him. Those relationships did not transfer with the keys. That was the thing Chitty did not fully understand when he took over and understood too well 18 months in. He was running the structural version of a company that had run on something structural systems cannot replicate. He was using the blueprint of a cathedral to build with inferior materials and wondering why the ceiling kept lowering. He lost 2 major contracts in his first 18 months. Competitors, younger companies with faster systems, lower overheads, and nothing to prove. He brought in a consultant at considerable expense who sat in the company's conference room for 6 weeks and produced a report recommending things Chitty had already considered and discarded. He restructured the sales team. Restructured again 6 months later. Spoke at the Professional Association annual dinner about West African freight and the next decade of opportunity with the careful optimism of a man who needs the room to believe him. The room believed him. They always believed the man at the podium. That is what podiums are for. His balance sheet did not believe him. And then Vantage Meridian arrived, and for 18 months Chitty could breathe. That is important context, not an excuse. Context. There is a difference. Gerald Tund, freight broker, London. I have not met the man. I do not want to be unfair to someone I have not met. What I have gathered from 2 credible sources who have worked with him is this. He is excellent at his job. He enjoys being excellent at his job, and he enjoys being known to be excellent at his job. And sometimes the third of those things causes problems the first 2 cannot fix. At a logistics industry dinner in London in February, 8 months before the renewal meeting, Gerald was seated next to a man named Desmond, Nigerian, works in the London end of a Houston-connected freight operation, the kind of peripheral connection that Nigerian professional networks generate constantly, not close, not intimate, but present, a thread in the web. Over the course of the dinner, Gerald mentioned the Vantage Meridian placement. It was a clean piece of work. A consultancy with serious West African client accounts, matched to a freight operator with genuine route expertise. The kind of thing a broker is proud of, he mentioned, because he mentions things that the consultancy owner was a Nigerian woman from Houston, Okafor, and the operator was also an Okafor outfit. Family, in fact. Her father's company. Small world. Desmond agreed it was a small world. Gerald moved on to other topics. Desmond stored it. 3 weeks later, Desmond was on a call with a contact in Houston. The contact mentioned Chitty Okafor in passing, the business association, some event. Desmond said, "Oh, interesting, I just heard something about that family. Have you heard about the daughter?" The London company. The contact had not heard. Desmond told him. The contact mentioned it to someone else. That chain of small worlds and Nigerian professional networks are a series of small worlds stacked inside each other. Arrived at Chidi Okafor on a Thursday morning in April. I know it was a Thursday because Mama Okafor called me Thursday evening about a women's circle catering question, and she mentioned, as a parenthesis, that Chidi had been quiet at dinner. Distracted. Not himself. She hoped he was not getting sick. I said I hope so too. Nothing. I am going to give that word the space it deserves because nothing is doing enormous structural work in this story, and I do not want you to pass over it. He did not call Adana. He had not called Adana since she left Houston, and she had not called him, and the silence ran symmetrically in both directions, which is the only form of equity that family had extended her, and he did not break it now. He did not tell his father. He did not tell his mother. He did not contact Gerald Tund to confirm what he'd heard. He did not instruct his contracts manager to pull the Vantage Meridian client file and look more carefully at the director registration. He went to church that Sunday in his good suit. He shook the right hands. He ate his mother's jollof rice at the family table. And if you have never eaten Mama Okafor's jollof rice, I understand this is not the correct moment to discuss it, but I want you to have the full picture. The table, the food, the family around it, the weight of everything that was not being said in that room while the food was passed and the conversation ran along its normal grooves. And he answered his father's questions about the company with the measured optimism he had been practicing. For 3 years, 1 month after learning that his sister was his largest client, Chidi Okafor sat across the conference table from Adana's London representative, a woman named Patricia, calm, precise, said very little and noted everything, and he signed the contract renewal. I want you to sit with what that signing required of him. He knew. He sat in that room, and he knew exactly what name was behind the company name on the contract. He knew where that money came from. He knew what it meant and what it had been meaning for 18 months. He signed. He shook Patricia's hand. He walked her to the lobby. He went back to his office. He sat at his desk. He continued being the man who ran his father's company. There is a word for what that is. I have several words for what that is. I am keeping them to myself because this is not my story and my words are not what you came here for. But I want you to find your own word. I want you to have it ready because we are not finished yet. Let me ask you something directly. You know what Chidi knows now. You know what Adana built. You know what the contract means for the company, what the silence means for the family, what the renewal means for both. What would you have done in Chidi's chair? I asked my husband this question at our kitchen table. He is a sensible man, an engineer, the kind of person who approaches every problem by drawing a diagram first to see what connects to what. He sat with the question for about 2 minutes. Then he said, "It depends on whether Chidi was ashamed or strategic." I have been thinking about that answer ever since, because those are not the same thing, but they can produce identical behavior. Shame keeps you quiet because the truth costs too much. Strategy keeps you quiet because silence is the only play that works. From the outside, they look the same. From the outside, they are the same. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you think. And then come back to it at the end of this story, because the end is going to change the question. Gerald Tund told her. Of course he did. Gerald, having shared the information at the February dinner, apparently felt the need in July to complete the circle. He mentioned to Adana directly, over a working lunch, that he had heard through a mutual connection that the Okafor family in Houston was aware of the Vantage Meridian connection. He said this because he assumed she knew. He said it the way he said most things, between the starter and the main course, in the warm, self-satisfied tone of a man delivering news he considers good. Adana said, "I see." Gerald said, "I assumed you knew he knew." Adana said, "Of course." She finished her lunch. She thanked him. She went back to her Canary Wharf office. She closed the door to her private office, which has a glass panel facing the main floor and which she almost never closes. and the staff noticed that the door was closed and gave it the space that closed doors in that office had learned to require. What happened in that office in the next hour, I do not know. I will not pretend to. What I know is what happened after. What I know is the 11 days. She sat with it for 11 days. I know the date Gerald told her from a source I trust. I know the date the non-renewal notice was sent from the contract documentation that eventually became part of the restructuring record. Between those two dates is 11 days. 11 days of Adana Okafor sitting in full possession of what she knew and deciding what to do with it. I have tried to imagine those 11 days. She worked. She was not the kind of woman who stopped working because something was heavy. The two things would have run alongside each other. The daily business of running a 14-client consultancy and the separate calculation that was running on a different track entirely. I imagine she went back through the timeline. 18 months of invoices to Okafor Logistics. 18 months of her company's money going directly into the company her father built and her brother inherited and her brother accepted while he sat across from her representative and said nothing and signed the renewal and went home to eat jollof rice at the family table and answer his father's questions about the business with measured optimism. 18 months. She would have been methodical about it the way she was methodical about everything. I did not know Adana personally, I want to be clear about that, but I know her type. I taught her type. I watched her type become themselves in classrooms and corridors over 20 years, and her type does not make decisions in anger. Anger comes. It is felt. It is noted. And then it is set to one side while the thinking happens, because the thinking is the part that matters. I imagine she thought about her father, the watch, the photographs in the newsletter. I imagine she thought about the carry-on bag and the plan, and the 8 years in London, and what those 8 years were and were not. What she built in them. What she did not receive during them. Not from the family. Not one word of it. On day 11, she called her contracts manager. She said, begin the non-renewal process for Okafor Logistics. Her contracts manager, a practical woman named Renata, who has worked with Adana since year 3 of the company, said, the full contract? Adana said, the full contract. The way I am told. She said it was the same way she said most things. Without announcement. Without weight. The sentence had the same temperature as every sentence around it. 4 words. A period. Move on. The notice arrived at Okafor Logistics on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. Formal. Correct. Through the broker. Exactly as the original contract had arrived. No cover note. No personal message. No explanation beyond the language the contract required. Vantage Meridian would not be renewing its freight services agreement with Okafor Logistics at the conclusion of the current term. The company extended its gratitude for services rendered and wished Okafor Logistics continued success in its operations. Continued success. Chitty read it at his desk. He read it twice. He did not forward it to anyone. He did not call Gerald Tund. He did not pick up his phone. He called his accountant. The accountant's name was Mr. Adeyemi. Different family, no relation to anyone in this story. I want to be precise. He had been Okafor Logistics accountant for 11 years, had watched the company's finances with the patient attention of a man who has had to deliver unwelcome arithmetic many times and has gotten very good at delivering it efficiently. The call was short. Without Vantage Meridian, the company lost 34% of its annual revenue effective at the end of the contract term. Combined with the operational losses that Chitty had been managing, the 2 contracts lost in year 1, the consultant fees, the restructuring costs, the general slow bleed of a company running on the residual credibility of its founder's name, the arithmetic did not have a good answer. Mr. Adeyemi said he would prepare a full assessment. Chitty said yes. He put the phone down. He sat at his desk in the office of a freight company his father had built over 30 years, and he sat there for I do not know how long. Nobody was watching. And then he put on his jacket and he went to a lunch meeting he had scheduled and he attended it, and nobody at that lunch meeting knew anything was wrong. He still did not call Adana. For months. I will not dramatize it because the mechanics of a business collapse are not dramatic. They are grinding. They are administrative. They are a sequence of phone calls and meetings and documents in which everything is phrased very carefully, and nobody says the word that is sitting in the center of every conversation. In month 1, a second client chose a competitor. In month 2, the equipment leasing company sent a notice. In month 3, a logistics manager named Deo, who had been with the company for 9 years and knew where every wire was, left for a position at a competitor who could offer certainty. His departure was not loud. He gave proper notice. He trained his replacement. He shook Chitty's hand on his last day. But Deo's departure was the kind of loss that does not appear on a balance sheet and cannot be replaced with a hire. By month 4, Okafor Logistics was in restructuring. Chief Okafor found out the way parents find out things their adult children have been managing badly. Not from the child, from someone who assumed he already knew. A business associate called the chief to express sympathy and offer any help he could provide. Chief Okafor thanked him with the composed dignity of 69 years of practice in public composure. He said he appreciated it very much. He ended the call. He sat in the chair in the house he had built, and he called Chitty. I was not in that conversation. I have been in enough conversations like it to know what the temperature was. What I observed is what I always observe, the surface, the public version. At church the following Sunday, Chief Okafor was in his usual seat. Chitty was beside him. The distance between them had not changed physically. They were sitting exactly as they always sat. But there was something in the quality of the space between them that had changed. Something that had been there before. The easy, unexamined assumption of alignment was no longer there. In its place was just two men sitting in adjacent seats, aware of each other, saying nothing. The kind of nothing that is much louder than something. What they always do. Gathered, discussed, assembled the story from available parts, filled the gaps with what was plausible, and circulated the assembled version with a speed and thoroughness that would impress any newsroom. The women's circle had 3 consecutive meetings where Okafor Logistics entered the conversation before anyone had said the word restructuring. The men's business association quietly organized a collection for Chief Okafor. He declined it, briefly, graciously, with the exact amount of words required for the decline and none more. Several people in that room told me later that the brevity alone broke something in them. Mama Okafor came to our 46th monthly meeting looking like a woman who had been carrying a building for several months and had decided today was the day she was going to put it down somewhere. She just had not decided where. I sat beside her, poured her tea before she asked for it, did not ask anything. She said, comfort. Did you know Adana had a company? I said I had heard something. She said, 2.3 million pounds. I said nothing. She said she built it in 8 years. In London. By herself. While we were... She stopped. She picked up her tea. Put it down without drinking. Picked it up again. I let her stop. I let her sit with the stopped sentence. Some sentences are not unfinished. They are deliberately ended before the part that costs too much. The part that cost too much in that sentence was while we were not watching, while we were not asking, while we were not including her name in the photographs. She drank her tea. I drank mine. We sat there for a while. Here is what circulated through the community for 3 months without anyone quite saying it directly. Did Adana know what the non-renewal would do to the company? Yes. Clearly yes. She built a supply chain consultancy. Revenue dependency analysis is fundamental to what her company does. When Vantage Meridian came on as a client of Okafor Logistics, she would have reviewed the vendor's financial profile as part of standard due diligence. You assess whether the vendor is stable enough to service your contracts reliably. She would have seen the numbers. She would have known exactly how dependent Okafor Logistics was on her contract. She knew. So the question is not whether she knew. The question is what she intended. And here is where I have to be honest with you in a way that is genuinely uncomfortable for a woman who spent 20 years telling children that questions have answers if you do the work. I did not know what she intended. I have sat with this for months. I have turned it over. I have applied every tool of observation and inference that 40 years of watching people has given me, and I have arrived at two equally possible versions of what Adana Okafor was doing, and I cannot, with the evidence available to me, choose between them. Version 1. She built Vantage Meridian as a consultancy. Through legitimate brokerage, she found Okafor Logistics as the best vendor for her West African route requirements. She contracted them. She received their service. When she learned that Chitty had known who she was and had renewed the contract in silence, had chosen the money and the silence over any form of acknowledgement, she decided she was not going to continue. She withdrew the contract. The consequences to the company were foreseeable but were not the goal. The goal was to stop giving her brother money he was not going to acknowledge. That is not a conspiracy. That is a limit. Version 2. She always knew. From the beginning, she chose Okafor Logistics with the full awareness of what she was doing and why. She spent 18 months building the dependency precisely. She waited until Chitty's silence confirmed everything she had always understood about how this family valued her. And then she withdrew, quietly, without announcement, without confrontation, without giving anyone the satisfaction of watching her decide. The same way she builds everything. The same way she left. Both versions are consistent with everything I know about this story. Both versions are consistent with who Adana Okafor appears to be. I have an instinct. I formed it around month 3 of sitting with this. I am keeping it because instincts are not facts, and this story deserves to be told in facts. What is your instinct? I want to know. Tell me in the comments. Come back after the ending and tell me if your instinct changed. The last thing I am going to tell you. 3 weeks after the restructuring filing was entered, a Sunday morning, service had ended and the congregation had moved into the fellowship hall. Coffee, small chops, the particular warm noise of 30 Nigerian families talking simultaneously, children navigating between adult legs, the specific smell of a church hall where someone has been frying plantains since 8 in the morning. I was near the door. I was in conversation with 2 other women's circle members about a completely unrelated matter. I was present in that conversation in the way I am sometimes present in conversations, fully enough to maintain my part, with enough remaining attention to be aware of the room. Chief Okafor was standing at the window at the far end of the hall, alone, which was itself something to notice. Chief Okafor was not a man who stood alone at gatherings. He was a man people moved toward. He had been, for 30 years, the kind of person around whom a corner of the room naturally organized itself. People brought him things, updates, greetings, business cards from their children who were looking for opportunities. He stood in rooms, and rooms arranged themselves around him. He was standing alone at the window. He took out his phone. He dialed. He stood at the window waiting for the call to connect. I watched his face from across the room with the peripheral attention of a woman who notices things. Not staring. I do not stare. Observing. The particular quality of a person waiting for a call to be answered. The specific expression that appears and changes and appears again while a phone rings in the gap between 2 people. He waited for what seemed like a full minute. The call did not connect. He stood at the window for a moment after, not moving, not putting the phone away, just standing there with it in his hand. Looking out at something that through the fellowship hall window was nothing more remarkable than the church parking lot and a section of Westheimer Road on a Sunday morning. Then someone came to him. A deacon, I think. He turned. His face rearranged itself. And I say rearrange because that is precisely what it did. I saw it happen, the composure returning to its public configuration the way a window returns to flat water after a stone. And he shook the deacon's hand and said something, and the conversation began. He put the phone in his pocket. I did not know if Adana saw the call arrive and chose not to answer. I did not know if she was simply unavailable, a Sunday morning in London, a meeting, a walk, her phone in another room. I do not know if there is a policy, quietly developed over 13 years of absence and 8 years of building something in silence in a city nobody in that family ever called to ask about, regarding calls from that particular number. I genuinely do not know. The facts as I have them end at a window, a call that did not connect, and a man putting his phone back in his pocket and turning to face the room he was standing in. That is the whole of what I know. I taught school for 20 years. Secondary school, which is the most honest environment a person can work in because adolescents have not yet learned to hide the important things, and so everything is visible if you know where to look. I watched more young people become themselves than I can count. The ones I remember are not the loudest, not the highest grades, not the ones who won the prizes and made the speeches and whose parents sent photographs to the newsletter. The ones I remember are the ones who left the room and went somewhere nobody was watching and built something real in the absence of an audience. Those students never needed the certificate. They did not need me to say well done, or the school to put their name on a board. They needed the room to themselves and enough time and enough stubbornness, and they would do the rest. I always knew which ones they were. I knew from the quality of their silence and the direction of their attention and the specific way they looked at a problem, not like it was a problem, but like it was a schedule. Adena Okafor left Houston at 22 with a plan nobody asked about. She is 35 now. The plan is finished. What comes after the plan? Whether she answers the phone, whether there is a version of this story that still has a table with enough plates, whether the distance of 13 years is a permanent structure or something else, I cannot tell you. I am a witness. I have my vantage point and its limits, and I have respected those limits throughout this telling. The rest of the story is hers. Whether she tells it is also hers. My name is Comfort Ease. I taught school for 20 years. I noticed things.